Okay, so this time we're doing a quick video on English language paper 2 question 3. It's a skill you've been asked to do before. It's English language paper 1 question 2. It's also a big part of your literature, and we also see it in the question 4 responses, which we'll deal with in other videos. I'm going to talk a lot less this time because you're way better at English language than me, but I'll chip in with the odd bit.
Okay, so this is what the question's going to look like. I've used the same example as I did before, so it's the November 2017 paper. If you want to have a look at it, it's available online. This is what it's going to look like. You now need to refer only to source A from lines 11 to 27. First thing you need to do is box that off. We don't want to be writing about anything from the wrong section. AQA are quite nice when it's lines like this, so it'll go up in fives, but it will give you line 11 and line 27, so it's not difficult to find it. Just make sure you draw a box around it, and we know that we've got to choose examples of language from that section. How does the writer use language to describe Sister Brendan? It'll always be about language, but the thing that it's going to ask you to focus on will change. So in this one, it's about Sister Brendan. Make sure you identify the focus so that you're writing about the right sorts of things, but 99% of the time, anything in that paragraph is going to be valid to answer that question. This is quite a nice question from AQA. So how does the writer use language? We need to know what we mean by language and what kinds of things we might want to write about for this question. So language means words and phrases, but it also means language features, techniques, methods, whatever you want to call that. So here are some things that work very well. So in the green box: metaphors, personification, zoomorphism, repetition, hyperbole, emotive language, listing. What you'll see here is these seem like fiction language features, and that's because the papers are something called literary non-fiction, which means they do read a bit like fiction. So all the things that you analyse in language paper 1, they're all relevant. All the terms that we use when we're teaching literature, they're still relevant as well. It's also absolutely fine, and in fact common, to just focus on adjectives and verbs and adverbs and just that word level analysis.
Yeah, it's interesting that when this paper first came out, a lot of the early revision guides will tell you to look for non-fiction features, but as you've just said, with it being literary non-fiction, it has got exactly the same thing. So that's those skills that you're good at, you can utilise in this question.
That orange box, they're my pet hates. I'm going to hold my hands up with that. They're things that I don't like. Alliteration is really, really difficult to analyse, as is any sort of quote-unquote clever alliteration. So sibilants or any of these kind of things, assonance, incredibly difficult to analyse. I would leave that alone. I'd be backing away. Similarly, the question will say that you can write about sentence forms if you want to. I wouldn't advise doing it. I think language is way cleverer, and you can definitely talk about it in more detail. So avoid those things, in my opinion. It's my advice. A good phrase to use is literally this shows and metaphorically this suggests, and this is the same for paper 1. You can use it in lit as well. So you just say what it literally means and then think about how the writer might be using it to metaphorically suggest something as well, and that works quite nicely. Try not to overuse it, we don't want to be repetitive, but it is a nice phrase. Okay, really quickly, I'm not going to talk through the whole mark scheme. I just want to look at this top level because it'd be fantastic if we could all be in level 4. There's 2 ways to get into level 4 with this question, and for most of the questions on the language paper this is the case. And the first way is to be perceptive. Now, being perceptive is wonderful. It means you're saying something super clever, something original, something unique, something the examiner's not hearing much. And that's wonderful if you can do that, but we can't teach you to do that because it's unseen, and by the very nature of it, as soon as somebody says it, it loses that originality. Now, the other way of getting into level 4, which you absolutely can do, and you can absolutely practice doing, is being detailed. So by being detailed, we take a quote and we're able to make multiple comments on the effect of that language in that context. And that's a very, very achievable way of finding yourself in level 4. So multiple, clearly explained, relevant comments on effect, and you will find yourself in that top level, even if you're not saying anything super clever or super original. that is a route into that top level, so that's absolutely worth trying to do.
I think it's important when you're analysing language to say the stuff that is definitely there first.
Yes.
One of the big mistakes people make is to see this idea of being perceptive, and they say, right, I'm going to go out on a limb, I'm going to try something. I know you've done an example of that later, but just get your I always say, get your examiner saying yes, get your examiner agreeing with you by saying stuff that you know is definitely right, and then that's where you can sort of push your analysis a bit further with your additionally it could suggest and so on.
Yeah, and it's that use of could, isn't it? Might, possibly, perhaps. You know, start off with the things you feel really confident on, and then you can throw in some curveballs later, but with less certainty.
Okay, so this is the extract from that paper. You can pause it now if you want and have a read through it. I'm not going to read it to you. But what I would do if I was answering this question, the same as the extract in the literature paper, is I would go through with a highlighter. I'd have a highlighter. If not, I'd have a pen that I could underline or circle things with, and I would just highlight every single piece of language that I feel I could say something about. Then once I've done that all the way through the extract, I can go back and say, right, which are the ones that I do definitely want to talk about. Obviously, just reading that first couple of sentences, you can see she's a slight, thin-cheeked woman with tiny, dark, darting eyes and a sharp little beak of a nose. There's something about those features that I could talk about, so I would highlight that and then just spend that couple of minutes thinking time, or a couple of seconds thinking time, saying which are the quotes that I can talk about, which can I say 2 or 3 things about.
Okay, so a couple of things to avoid. So on that left hand side, that box, saying that things are being implied or suggested when they're just there. So the writer describes her eyes as darting, which implies that they are darting and moving. Not really getting any marks for that, you're not actually saying anything. Whereas on the right hand side, the writer describes her eyes as darting, suggesting a constant restless movement as she surveys the school. That's definitely going to get me some marks. So it's thinking about, when I'm choosing to analyse words, don't assume that because you know what that means that your examiner is going to kind of award you for that. So make sure you're explaining your points as clearly as you can. And then on the other end of the spectrum, let's not stretch this too far. So we don't want to wander off into the realm of sort of completely veering away from the story altogether. Quite a lot of people on this one like to suggest that Sister Brendan, because she's described as the black bird, that she's evil because black has connotations of evil, but she's a sister running a school, so she's probably not evil. So we need to try and keep it in the right area so it feels sort of believable and possible as analysis. And this is an example of stretching it too far. The writer describes her eyes as darting, which links to the game darts. Sometimes darts might miss the darts board and hit the wall, and this could show that Sister Brendan has lost her way and might want to change careers because her job isn't hitting the bullseye for her at this minute. No, just no. Like,
it's a good example of someone trying to be perceptive.
Yes.
But it's just not.
It's just not really going to get any marks, is it? And you're wasting time on things. Like, try and interpret things, but try and make sure that you're rooting it in what the text is actually about. Don't take those words out of context and run away with them. That it has to be, what does that word mean in that context of this particular sort of extract. So try not to overstretch, would be my advice. Things that we don't like, we agree with this old man. Any of those are not really going to get you any marks. It might get you into level 1, but it really needs to be the effect of that specific choice of language in that exact context rather than these vague ones. I really like, it makes me feel what the writer feels, particularly when you don't then go on to say what it is, like you've got a secret. You and the writer are in it, but I'm not. So yeah, those are all things to avoid. Try and be specific. And then lastly, so I've gone through, I've selected my quotes, I've thought about what the effect of them, what the effect of those particular words in that context are, and I'm going to write it up. And the best format to use is the TQEE paragraph. I put a pigeon with a pink hat on because I think sometimes TQEE sounds a little bit like a pigeon. Not sure it does, but in my head it sort of does. But it's just use some terminology, so your language features, your word classes, clear quote, and then as many different comments on effect as you can, making sure they are clearly explained and definitely relevant to that extract.
Bye.
Done.